The thick manila envelope felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, its edges sharp enough to draw blood. I stared at the bold, unforgiving legal print stamped across the top page, Notice of Partition Action. The ink seemed to pulse, mocking the very foundation of my life. They were actually doing it. My own flesh and blood, the people who had shared my childhood, were legally demanding the forced auction of the only home I had ever truly known. They knew I didn't have $250,000 in liquid cash to buy them out. They knew the property market was full of vultures circling fresh meat. And they knew with absolute terrifying certainty that if this went to a judge, I would be thrown out onto the street, stripped of our grandfather's legacy. My brother's smug text message vibrated against my palm right at that moment. Sign the papers, little bro, it's just business. Don't make this ugly, just business. My sanctuary, the cedar walls that held the echoes of our grandparents' laughter. The dock I had rebuilt with my own bleeding hands. To them, it was nothing but a liquidated asset to fund their delusions. My chest tightened until I couldn't pull air into my lungs. They wanted a war. They were about to burn down our family history for a quick payout, and they expected me to just hand them the matches. It wasn't always a battleground. To understand how a family decays into a court-ordered execution of its own legacy, you have to understand what Blackwood Lake was before the greed set in. You have to understand the house. My grandfather Elias didn't just buy the property, he carved it out of the wilderness with a relentless, quiet stubbornness. Back in the late 70s, before the lake was surrounded by bloated multi-million-dollar modern monstrosities of glass and steel, it was just dense pine forest and cold, clear water. He bought 3 acres of waterfront dirt on a machinist's salary and spent the next 10 years building the cabin on weekends and holidays. He felled some of the trees himself. He laid the fieldstone for the massive, ceiling-high fireplace rock by rock, his knuckles perpetually bruised and coated in mortar. He milled the cedar siding, sanded the wide plank oak floors, and drove every single iron nail into the wraparound deck. The house smelled permanently of wood smoke, old paperbacks, and the faint, sweet tang of pine needles baking in the summer sun. It was a place of profound, immovable peace. For me, it was the only place the world made sense. While my older brother, Derek, and my older sister, Sarah, couldn't wait to escape the boring woods for the neon distractions of the city, I practically lived in my grandfather's shadow. I learned how to winterize the pipes, how to patch the cedar shake roof, how to bleed the old boiler in the basement, and how to coax the temperamental outboard motor on his aluminum fishing boat back to life. I didn't just love the house, I belonged to it. When our grandparents passed away within 6 months of each other, my grandmother from a sudden stroke, my grandfather from a broken heart that his doctors politely diagnosed as heart failure, the world stopped spinning. I was 30 years old, working remotely as a freelance architectural drafter, content in my quiet, introverted life. Derek was 34, bouncing between his 4th failed startup and a burgeoning obsession with cryptocurrency. Sarah was 32, drowning in credit card debt while trying to maintain the illusion of a luxury lifestyle on social media. We sat in the stuffy, leather-scented office of our grandfather's estate attorney, the silence heavy and suffocating. The lawyer, a tired-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, read the terms of the trust. My grandparents, blinded by that tragic, naive hope that so many elderly parents possess, believed that shared property would force us to remain close. They left the house, the land, and what little remained of their savings in a 3-way, irrevocable trust. The property is to be divided in equal 1/3 shares, the lawyer had droned, sliding the thick parchment across the mahogany desk. Your grandfather left a letter. He wrote, "To my grandchildren I leave my sanctuary. May it be a place where you always find your way back to each other. Keep the fires burning." I had cried. I remember the hot tears spilling over my cheeks, the grief tearing at my throat. I looked over at my siblings, expecting to see a mirrored reflection of my sorrow. Instead, Derek was tapping his pen rapidly against his knee, his eyes darting across the paperwork like a shark smelling a drop of blood in the water. So, Derek had interrupted, not even looking at the lawyer. "What's the current market appraisal on a 3-acre waterfront lot on Blackwood Lake these days? Gotta be north of 800K, right?" Sarah had instantly straightened up, her manicured nails gripping her knockoff designer handbag. "Wait, really, we each get 1/3 of that." That was the exact moment the rot began. The compromise initially was that I would move into the house full-time. The modest trust fund left behind was barely enough to cover the estate taxes and the transfer fees. There was no massive pile of cash to maintain the property. I took over everything. Because I worked remotely, it made sense. I agreed to shoulder the burden of the yearly property taxes, the exorbitant lakefront insurance premiums, the utilities, and the endless physical maintenance required by a 40-year-old wooden house in a harsh climate. In exchange, I got to live there. I became the custodian of the legacy. Derek and Sarah had enthusiastically agreed. Why wouldn't they? They were getting a free luxury vacation home without having to lift a finger or spend a single dime. The toxic normal established itself rapidly, insidiously. Over the next 6 years, the lake house transformed from my quiet sanctuary into their personal, unpaid resort. My life became an endless cycle of dreading the weekends and bracing for the holidays. Let me tell you about my brother, Derek. Derek is a man who firmly believes he is the smartest person in any room, despite a lifetime of evidence to the contrary. He is loud, aggressively entitled, and views every relationship through a transactional lens where he must be the absolute victor. He treats the world like it owes him a red carpet. His visits were like military invasions. He would never call ahead. I would simply wake up on a Saturday morning to the crunch of gravel in the driveway and the slamming of car doors. Derek would march through the front door, usually flanked by 4 or 5 business associates, loud, obnoxious men wearing mirrored sunglasses and too much cologne. "Yo, little bro," he would boom, tossing his duffel bag onto the antique dining table my grandfather had built by hand. "Brought the boys up for a mastermind retreat. We need the boats gassed up, and where did you put the good bourbon? Don't tell me you drank it all." He wouldn't ask, he commanded. Over a single weekend, Derek and his friends would decimate the house. They would leave wet towels rotting on the hardwood floors, track mud across the vintage Persian rugs, and leave the kitchen looking like a bomb had detonated in a grocery store. Empty beer cans would be stuffed into the cushions of the sofa. The fire pit would be overflowing with half-melted plastic cups and garbage. They were too lazy to walk to the bins. If I ever tried to intervene, if I ever dared to ask him to clean up after himself or respect the property, the bullying was immediate and relentless. "Relax, man," he would sneer, getting uncomfortably close to my face, using his height to intimidate me just like he did when we were teenagers. "You're living here rent-free, right? You're basically the property manager, so manage the property, don't ruin the vibe. We own this place just as much as you do." "We own this place," that was the weapon. They held their one-third shares over my head like a guillotine. And then there was Sarah. If Derek was a sledgehammer, Sarah was a slow-acting poison. She was incapable of genuine empathy, entirely consumed by how her life appeared to her meager thousands of followers online. She was perpetually broke, constantly chasing trends, and fundamentally lazy. Sarah's visits were less violent than Derek's, but far more emotionally draining. She treated me not as a brother, but as a combination of a bellhop, a caterer, and an extra in the movie of her life. She would arrive with her equally vacuous friends for girls' weekends. They would take over the entire house, forcing me to retreat to my small bedroom in the attic just to escape the shrieking and the ring lights. I remember the 4th of July, 3 years into the arrangement. Sarah threw a massive party, inviting people I didn't even know. They dragged my grandfather's heavy hand-carved Adirondack chairs down to the muddy shoreline, scratching the wood against the rocks. I watched from the kitchen window, my stomach churning, as one of her friends spilled red wine all over the cushions my grandmother had sewn. Later that night, I found Sarah in the kitchen. She had broken the glass carafe of the coffee maker and was simply kicking the shards under the refrigerator with her bare foot. "Sarah, what are you doing?" I asked, rushing over with a broom. "You're going to cut yourself or someone else will." She sighed, a theatrical, exaggerated sound of profound annoyance. "God, you are so dramatic. It's just a cheap coffee pot. I'll buy you a new one." She never did. Just like she never paid for the groceries she and her friends devoured, or the electricity they burned, leaving every light in the house on all night, or the high-speed internet I had to upgrade just so she could stream her videos without buffering. When I eventually presented her with a spreadsheet, a quiet, polite attempt to show her that my rent-free living was actually costing me $35,000 a year in taxes, insurance, and upkeep, she immediately weaponized her tears. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she had sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "You know how stressed I am about money right now. You get to live in this gorgeous mansion every single day, and you're trying to nickel and dime your own sister for some groceries. Granddad would be so disgusted with you." That was the trump card. They constantly invoked my grandfather's memory to justify their parasitism. They twisted his dying wish of keeping the family together into a mandate for my eternal servitude. If I pushed back, I was the one destroying the family. I was the selfish one, I was the bad brother, so I swallowed it. I swallowed the rage, the disrespect, and the exhaustion. I spent my Sundays scrubbing their vomit off the bathroom tiles, repairing the drywall they dented, and silently patching the invisible cracks in my own sanity. I did it because I was terrified of losing the house. I knew that if the tension snapped, if the fragile piece broke, they had the power to force a sale. I was a hostage to my own love for the property. I thought I could endure it forever. I thought my capacity for suffering was infinite, so long as I could still wake up at dawn, walk out onto the quiet dock, and drink my coffee while the mist rolled off the glassy surface of Blackwood Lake. I thought if I just kept my head down, paid the bills, and acted as the silent caretaker, they would eventually lose interest. I was wrong. Greed is not a fire that burns itself out. It is a rot that expands until there is nothing left to consume. The catalyst, the moment the illusion of our family finally shattered beyond repair, arrived in late October. The tourist season had ended, the air had turned brutally cold, and the lake was beginning to freeze at the edges. I had just finished spending 3 grueling weekends restaining the entire back deck, a job that left my shoulders screaming and my hands blistered. A massive freak cold snap hit the region, plunging temperatures to record lows. The house's ancient, industrial-sized water heater, the one my grandfather had installed in the late 80s, finally gave up the ghost. It didn't just break, it ruptured catastrophically in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of rushing water. I ran down to the basement to find 4 inches of freezing, rusty water flooding the concrete floor, rapidly creeping toward the drywall of the finished den and the foundation's wooden sill plates. If the water reached the drywall, the mold would be catastrophic. For 48 straight hours, I didn't sleep. I rented an industrial submersible pump, standing knee-deep in freezing water, hauling heavy, wet hoses out the basement window into the snow. I fought to save the foundation of our shared asset. I spent hours scrubbing the concrete with bleach, running industrial dehumidifiers, and desperately trying to salvage whatever I could. When the disaster was finally contained, I called a plumber. The verdict was grim. The entire unit needed to be replaced, along with a significant section of the corroded copper piping leading to it. The emergency weekend call-out fee, the new commercial-grade heater, and the labor came out to $4,200. I looked at my bank account. The property taxes had just been paid the month prior, draining my savings. I simply did not have $4,000. For the first time in 6 years, I decided I could no longer bear the financial weight alone. It wasn't a request for vacation funds. It was an emergency repair to prevent the house from becoming uninhabitable. I sent a group text to Derek and Sarah, explaining the situation clearly and unemotionally. I attached the photos of the flooded basement, the invoice from the plumber, and my bank statement showing I had just paid the $12,000 property tax bill. I managed to save the basement from permanent water damage, I typed, my fingers stiff and aching. But the heater is dead. The replacement is $4,200. I am tapped out from the property taxes. I need you both to chip in $1,400 each so we can have running hot water and keep the pipes from freezing this winter. I hit send. I waited 4 hours later, my phone rang. It was Derek. I answered, expecting at least a modicum of understanding, perhaps even a begrudging agreement. Are you out of your mind? Derek's voice blasted through the speaker, thick with rage. You want me to send you $1,400 for a water heater? Derek, it's an emergency, I said, keeping my voice level though my hands were shaking. The house has no hot water, the pipes will freeze. I paid 12 grand in taxes last month. I literally don't have the cash. That sounds like a you problem, bro, Derek spat. You're the one living there, you're using the hot water every day. Why should I pay to fix something you broke? I didn't break a 40-year-old steel tank, Derek, it rusted out. We own this house together, it's a capital expense. Don't give me that accounting bullshit, he yelled. You get free rent. You've been living like a king on our dime for 6 years. You figure it out, get a second job, put it on a credit card. I'm not giving you a dime and neither is Sarah. We already talked about it. I felt the blood drain from my face. You talk to Sarah, Derek, please. If the pipes freeze and burst, the house will be ruined. Then don't let them freeze, idiot, he sneered. Listen to me very carefully. We are done subsidizing your lazy, pathetic life. In fact, Sarah and I had a long talk this morning. This whole arrangement, it's not working for us anymore. You sitting up there playing lumberjack while we get nothing out of our inheritance. It's over. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. What do you mean it's over? I could hear the cruel, triumphant smile in his voice. We realized we're sitting on a goldmine and you're treating it like a monastery. Sarah's friend manages Airbnbs. We ran the numbers. If we gut the inside, pack it with bunk beds and advertise it as a party house for bachelor parties and frat weekends, we can pull in 5 grand a week during the summer. My heart stopped. No, no, Derek, absolutely not. The Lake Association has strict noise ordinances, the neighbors would crucify us, and I am not managing a frat house. Who said you were managing it? Derek laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You're moving out, we're turning it into a full-time, high-turnover rental. Passive income, baby. Sarah needs to pay off her cards, and I need capital for a new venture, it's happening. I own a third of this house. I shouted, the dam finally breaking, years of suppressed rage boiling over. You cannot force me to move out and turn grandfather's home into a cheap, trashy hotel. I won't allow it. There was a long, terrible silence on the other end of the line. When Derek spoke again, his voice was deadly calm, stripped of all brotherly pretense. It was the voice of a predator. You really don't get it, do you? Derek whispered. You don't have a choice. We have the majority. We have 2/3. You either agree to the rental plan and move out quietly, or Sarah and I will hire a lawyer on Monday. We will file a partition lawsuit. We will drag you into court, force a public auction, and we will sell the house right out from under you to the highest bidder. You won't just lose the house, you'll lose everything fighting us in court. You wouldn't, I choked out, tears of sheer, helpless panic stinging my eyes. Derek, please, it's grandfather's house, it's my home. Watch me, Derek said. You have until Friday to pack your shit. The line went dead. I stood alone in the freezing, silent kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. I looked around at the heavy timber beams my grandfather had hoisted with his own 2 hands, the floorboards I had polished on my knees, the home I had sacrificed my own youth to protect. They weren't just threatening to take my home, they were promising to destroy me. And as I stared out the window at the frozen lake, a cold, hard knot of absolute terror began to tighten in my stomach, because I knew with sickening certainty that Derek wasn't bluffing. Friday came and went, and I did not pack a single box. Instead, I spent that weekend living in a state of suspended animation, moving through the freezing house like a ghost haunting its own grave. Without the $4,200 to replace the ruptured water heater, I resorted to boiling massive pots of lake water on the vintage electric stove just to sponge bathe in the frigid bathroom. The cold in the house wasn't just ambient, it was aggressive. It seeped into the marrow of my bones, a physical manifestation of the dread pooling in my stomach. Every time a branch snapped in the woods outside, my heart hammered against my ribs, expecting to see Derek's oversized truck barreling down the gravel driveway to physically drag me out. But the physical attack didn't come. The psychological siege began first. It started on Monday morning, exactly at 8 a.m. I was sitting at my drafting table, wrapped in 2 wool blankets, trying to focus on a client's blueprints when my phone vibrated. A text from Sarah, then another. Then a group thread with Derek. Sarah, so have you found a new place yet? I need to get the contractors in by the 15th to start tearing down those ugly pine walls. Derek, better not leave the place a mess. We have an Airbnb photographer scheduled for the end of the month. Sarah, I'm ordering 5 sets of bunk beds today. We're going to market it to bachelor parties. The Blackwood blowout, it's going to be so viral. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The sheer audacity of it, the absolute disregard for the sacredness of the space made me nauseous. They were talking about painting the handcrafted fieldstone fireplace white. They were talking about ripping out the wide plank oak floors my grandfather had sanded on his hands and knees, replacing them with cheap gray vinyl laminate because it was waterproof for beer spills. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I typed my response, ensuring every word was a cold, hard fact. Me, you are not turning grandfather's house into a frat house. Aside from the fact that it would destroy the property, you clearly haven't read the Blackwood Lake Association bylaws. Short-term rentals under 30 days are strictly prohibited. The moment you list it on Airbnb, the HOA will issue a $500 daily fine, and they will place a lien on the property within a month. I am a resident, and I will personally report the listing the second it goes live. Furthermore, I am a 1/3 owner. You cannot authorize contractors to demolish the interior without my legal consent. If a contractor steps foot on this property without my signature, I will have them arrested for trespassing. I hit send, my thumb trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. The silence that followed lasted precisely 3 minutes. Then my phone began to ring. I declined it. It rang again. I declined it. Over the next 2 hours, Derek called me 27 times. Sarah sent 42 text messages, ranging from furious, expletive-laden rants to manipulative, crying voicemails about how I was ruining her life and stealing her future. I muted the thread, buried my face in my hands, and tried to breathe. I had won the battle over the Airbnb. The HOA bylaws were ironclad, and they knew it, but by using that weapon, I had officially declared war. I had backed 2 incredibly entitled, greedy predators into a corner, and they were about to retaliate with everything they had. The first strike hit my utility accounts. On Wednesday, I logged onto my computer to pay the monthly electric bill. I navigated to the power company's portal, entered my saved password, and hit enter. Error, incorrect password. I frowned, retyping it carefully. Error. I clicked the forgot password link. A prompt appeared. A reset link has been sent to d***** at gmail.com. Derek's email. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. For 6 years, the bills had been in my grandfather's name, maintained under the trust, but I was the sole authorized manager who paid them. I scrambled to check the internet provider. Locked out. The garbage collection service, locked out. The lakefront property insurance portal, locked out. I spent 4 agonizing hours on hold with various customer service representatives. Because I was not the sole owner, and because Derek had managed to fax them a copy of the trust document proving his one-third ownership, he had legally authorized himself to change the primary contact information and lock me out of every single account that kept the house functioning. "I'm sorry, sir," a tired-sounding woman from the power company told me over the phone. The primary account holder, Derek, specifically requested a password change and noted that no information is to be released to secondary parties without his verbal consent. "We can't let you access the payment portal." "But I'm the one who pays the bill," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "I live here. If the power gets shut off, the pipes will freeze, the house will literally fall apart." "I understand your frustration, sir, but you'll have to take that up with the primary account holder. Is there anything else I can help you with today?" I hung up, staring blankly at the wall. They weren't just trying to inconvenience me, they were trying to freeze me out. If the bills didn't get paid, the power would be cut. Without power, the baseboard heaters I was relying on to survive without the water heater would die. I would be forced to abandon the house just to survive the winter. Then came the weekend. I should have known they wouldn't just stay in the city and fight me through screens. It was a Friday evening, the sun dipping below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the frozen lake. I was sitting by the wood stove, the only source of real warmth left in the house, reading a book by the light of a single lamp to conserve electricity. The sudden, roaring cacophony of engines shattered the silence. I jumped up, my heart leaping into my throat, and ran to the window. 4 vehicles, Derek's massive black truck and 3 unfamiliar SUVs, were tearing up the driveway, spinning their tires in the gravel and tearing deep, muddy ruts into the frosted lawn. Before I could even reach the front door, it burst open. The icy wind howled into the living room, followed by Derek, Sarah, and no less than 12 other people. They carried massive coolers of cheap beer, handles of liquor, and portable Bluetooth speakers the size of small suitcases. "Surprise, squatter," Derek bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive-looking ski jacket and a triumphant, cruel smirk. "What are you doing?" I demanded, standing my ground in the center of the room as a horde of strangers pushed past me, tracking muddy snow all over the oak floorboards. "Get these people out of here." "Excuse me," Sarah scoffed, strutting in behind Derek. She was holding a lit cigarette, something my grandfather had strictly forbidden inside the cedar-walled house. She deliberately tapped her ashes onto the Persian rug. "This is our house, we're having a party. If you don't like it, you can go hide in the attic, or better yet, you can finally pack your bags and leave." It was a coordinated invasion. A deliberate, calculated attempt to make my existence in the house so unbearable that I would break. For the next 48 hours, I lived in hell. They blasted bass-heavy club music so loudly the window panes rattled in their frames. They cranked the thermostats up to 80 degrees, wasting electricity they knew I couldn't monitor or afford to pay. Derek's friends, a collection of aggressive, heavy-drinking sycophants, treated me like the hired help. They demanded I fetch them firewood, mocked my worn-out flannel shirts, and intentionally knocked over stacks of my architectural blueprints. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I paced my small bedroom in the attic, listening to the destruction below. I heard the sickening crash of glass breaking, one of my grandmother's antique mason jars. I heard the thud of heavy boots jumping on the living room furniture. I heard someone vomit off the back deck directly onto the patio furniture below. Whenever I tried to go downstairs to salvage the situation, Derek was there, blocking my path, aggressively invading my personal space. "You bring this on yourself," he hissed at me late Saturday night, pinning me against the kitchen counter with his sheer bulk. His breath reeked of whiskey and malice. "You think you're so smart with your HOA rules. You think you can trap us in a dead asset. I will make your life a living nightmare. I will bring people up here every single weekend until you crawl out of here on your hands and knees." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, the exhaustion finally breaking my facade. "It's our family home, Derek. It's all we have left of them." He laughed, a cold, dead sound. Grow up, family is a biological accident, money is real, and you're standing on my money. They left on Sunday afternoon, leaving the house looking like it had been ransacked by a hostile army. Sticky puddles of alcohol stained the floorboards, burn holes marred the upholstery of the sofa. Garbage was piled high in the kitchen, stinking of rotting food. It took me 3 days to clean the mess, my hands raw from bleach, my spirit utterly crushed. I realized then that I couldn't endure a war of attrition. They didn't care about the house. They would happily destroy it piece by piece if it meant breaking me. But the true escalation, the killing blow, arrived in the mail on Thursday. I was walking back from the mailbox at the end of the long driveway, shivering in the biting wind, sorting through a stack of junk mail. Tucked between a grocery flyer and a credit card offer was a crisp, white envelope made of thick, expensive linen paper. The return address belonged to a law firm in the city, Vanguard and Hayes, attorneys at law. I froze. The ambient sounds of the forest, the wind in the pines, the distant call of a crow seemed to vanish, sucked into a vacuum of pure dread. I tore the envelope open right there in the snow. It was a formal demand for partition and notice of intent to sue. The legal jargon was dense, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. The letter, drafted by a lawyer named Marcus Hayes, outlined that his clients, Derek and Sarah, collectively holding a two-thirds majority interest in the property, were formally demanding the liquidation of the asset. My eyes skimmed down the page, catching on phrases that felt like physical blows. Due to irreconcilable differences in the management and use of the shared asset, demand the immediate buyout of our client's equity, valued at an estimated $600,000, $300,000 per client. Failure to produce the requested buyout funds within 14 days will result in the immediate filing of a partition lawsuit in the County Superior Court. Forcing a judicial sale by public auction whereby the property will be sold to the highest bidder, I leaned against the icy metal of the mailbox to keep my legs from giving out. A partition lawsuit. It was the nuclear option. I knew enough about real estate law to know exactly how catastrophic this was. A judge wouldn't care about my grandfather's dying wish. A judge wouldn't care about my sentimental attachment or the blood and sweat I had poured into maintaining the house. The law was cold and mathematical. If co-owners couldn't agree, the court would seize the property, appoint a disinterested referee, and auction it off on the courthouse steps. And the reality of a forced auction was devastating. Homes sold at partition auctions rarely fetched market value. They were bought by flippers and developers for pennies on the dollar. But the real tragedy was the fees. The court-appointed referee, the auctioneer, and the opposing lawyers would all take their massive cuts directly from the sale proceeds before a single dime was distributed to the owners. If they did this, not only would I lose my home, but the remaining equity would be devoured by the legal system. We would all walk away with almost nothing. It was mutual assured destruction. I scrambled for my phone and called Derek. He answered on the first ring, clearly expecting the call. "Did you get the letter?" he asked, his voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "Derek, you can't do this," I gasped, my chest heaving, the cold air burning my lungs. "A partition sale, do you have any idea how much money we'll lose? The lawyers will eat half the equity. You'll be throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars just to spite me." "We won't lose a dime," Derek replied calmly, "because it's not going to auction. We just needed you to realize that we hold all the cards. We're not playing your little games anymore. Be at the house on Saturday at noon. We have a proposition for you, a way out." "What proposition?" I demanded. "Just be there," he said and hung up. The next 48 hours were a blur of absolute terror. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. I paced the empty, echoing rooms of the house, trailing my fingers along the rough-hewn stone of the fireplace, memorizing the grain of the wood, mourning the loss of a life I hadn't even finished living. I was trapped. I had no money for a lawyer to fight them, and even if I did, you can't legally force co-owners to keep property they want to sell. When Saturday arrived, the sky was a bruised, heavy purple threatening snow. At precisely noon, a sleek black Mercedes sedan pulled into the driveway, followed by Derek's truck. Derek and Sarah emerged from the truck, dressed impeccably, exuding an aura of absolute victory. From the Mercedes emerged a man in a sharp, tailored suit, Marcus Hayes, their lawyer. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and looked at my grandfather's house with the cold, calculating eyes of a butcher evaluating a carcass. I stood on the front porch, arms crossed against the cold, refusing to invite them inside. "Nice day for a meeting," Derek smirked, walking up the steps. "Shall we?" "Whatever you have to say it out here," I replied, my voice raspy from disuse and stress. The lawyer stepped forward, unlatching his briefcase. "As you wish, I'll keep this brief. My clients have made it clear that they wish to liquidate their interest in this property. A partition action will be costly and time-consuming for all parties, particularly for you given your financial constraints. He pulled out a thick stack of stapled documents and handed them to me. The cover page read, Real Estate Purchase and Sale Agreement. What is this? I asked, staring at the paper. A miracle, Sarah chimed in, checking her reflection in the dark windowpane of the front door. You should be thanking us on your knees. We found a buyer, Derek said, puffing his chest out. A corporate developer, an LLC out of state. They're looking for prime waterfront acreage to bulldoze and build a luxury megamansion compound. They don't care about the house, they just want the dirt. I felt bile rise in my throat. Bulldoze. The word echoed in my mind, a violent, destructive sound. They wanted to tear down my grandfather's legacy to build a sterile glass box for a billionaire. They're offering $750,000, the lawyer continued, tapping the paper. All cash, fast closing, no inspections, no contingencies. It's slightly below market value, but it saves us the year-long headache and immense cost of a partition lawsuit. However, the buyer is absolutely uncompromising on one condition. The lawyer looked me dead in the eyes, his expression devoid of pity. They want the entire parcel. They will only buy it if all three owners sign away their rights simultaneously. If even one owner refuses, they walk away. Derek stepped closer, invading my space once again, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. So here's the deal, little brother. You sign that contract. You agree to sell your third to the developer. You take your $250,000, you pack your bags, and you disappear. And if I refuse, I whispered, my hands gripping the contract so tightly the paper crumpled. If I refuse to let them bulldoze our home. Derek leaned in, his voice dropping to a vicious, venomous hiss. If you refuse, Marcus files the partition lawsuit on Monday morning. We will drag you through court for years. We will drain every cent you have. We will force the public auction, and by the time the lawyers and the referees take their cut, you'll be lucky to walk away with 50 grand. You won't be able to afford a cardboard box, let alone a new house. Sarah smiled, a saccharine, hollow expression. Don't be stupid, take the money, it's more than you deserve anyway. You have until Wednesday at 5 p.m. to return the signed contract to my office, the lawyer said smoothly, snapping his briefcase shut. If we do not have your signature by then, the lawsuit is filed. I strongly advise you to consult your own counsel, though given the time frame, your options are exceptionally limited. They didn't wait for a response. They turned and walked back to their vehicles, laughing about where they were going to eat lunch on the drive back to the city. I stood alone on the porch as the taillights disappeared down the snowy driveway, holding the contract that represented the execution order for my entire life. The silence of the lake rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. The cold wind bit at my face, but I couldn't feel it. I was numb. They had me. It was a flawless, brutal checkmate. Sign the paper, betray my grandfather, and lose the home forever. Or fight a war I couldn't win, lose the home anyway, and be left utterly destitute. Wednesday at 5 p.m. A ticking clock on my total ruin. I looked down at the contract, the corporate buyer's name printed boldly across the top line, Horizon Development Group LLC. I fell to my knees on the icy wood of the deck, the breath leaving my lungs in a ragged, broken sob, completely and utterly defeated. I stayed on the frozen timber of the deck until the sun dipped completely below the tree line, plunging the world into a freezing, bruised twilight. I don't know how long I cried. At some point, the tears simply stopped, freezing to my eyelashes and cheeks, leaving behind a profound, hollow emptiness. I dragged myself back inside the house. The silence was deafening. The cold was absolute. I threw the Horizon Development Group contract onto the kitchen island and stared at it by the weak beam of a battery-powered lantern. Sunday was a day of funerals. I walked through every room of my grandfather's house, mourning it while it was still mine. I ran my hands over the mortar of the fireplace. I sat in the broken Adirondack chair by the frozen lake. I packed away a few small, sentimental items, my grandmother's favorite quilt, an old tobacco pipe, knowing that if I didn't take them now, Derek would likely throw them in a dumpster by the end of the week. I had accepted my fate. I was a draftsman, an introvert who drew blueprints for a living. I was not a warrior. I had no war chest. They had backed me into a corner with a nuclear weapon, and I had nothing but a rusted shield. But as the sun rose on Monday morning, piercing the frost on the windows with a blinding, aggressive glare, a tiny, hot ember of defiance ignited in the center of my chest. I was going to lose, I knew that. But I refused to let Marcus Hayes, their smug, overpriced attack dog, dictate the terms of my surrender without a second opinion. I needed to know with absolute legal certainty that I had no way out. At 8 a.m., I started calling real estate attorneys in the city. I didn't look for the flashy firms with billboards, I looked for the old blood. The quiet, ruthless litigators who handled complex commercial zoning and bitter trust disputes. By 10:30 a.m., after begging 3 different paralegals, I managed to secure an emergency, exorbitant hourly rate consultation with a man named Arthur Vance. Vance's office was the antithesis of the lake house. It was a sterile, glass-walled cube on the 42nd floor of a downtown high-rise, smelling of ozone and expensive espresso. Vance himself was in his late 60s, impeccably dressed, with eyes like chipped flint. He did not offer me a sympathetic smile when I sat down. He just held out his hand for the paperwork. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a heavy brass clock on his desk and the crisp rustle of pages turning as Vance read through the trust documents, Hayes's demand letter, and the Horizon contract. I sat there, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles ached, bracing for the final nail in the coffin. Finally, Vance set the papers down. He took off his reading glasses and leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "Your siblings are greedy, short-sighted fools," Vance said. His voice was gravelly, devoid of emotion. "And their attorney, Mr. Hayes, is lazy. He's using a boilerplate intimidation tactic." "But is he right?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can they force the sale?" "Yes," Vance replied simply. It felt like a punch to the gut. "The law of partition is absolute. If 2/3 of the ownership wants to liquidate, the court will force the liquidation. You cannot hold them hostage in a shared asset, and if it goes to a judicial auction, it will be a bloodbath. The court-appointed referee will take 5%, the auctioneer takes a cut. The lawyers take their hourly fees from the gross proceeds. By the time the house is sold, likely to a bottom feeder flipper for 30% below market value, you will all be left with pennies. So I have to sign this," I said, pointing a trembling finger at the Horizon contract. "I have to let this developer bulldoze my grandfather's home, or Derek will bankrupt me." Vance didn't answer immediately. He picked up the Horizon contract again, his eyes scanning the corporate letterhead, the all-cash offer, the stipulations. He looked at the demand letter from Hayes, then he looked at me. "Tell me about your financial situation," Vance demanded abruptly. "Liquid cash, retirement accounts, equity, credit score. Give me the exact numbers." I blinked, thrown off by the sudden pivot. I have about 12,000 in a high-yield savings account. I have 40,000 in an IRA. My credit score is excellent, around 810. I don't have any debt, but I don't have anywhere near the $250,000 I'd need to buy out even one of their shares, let alone both. "And the house itself?" Vance asked, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "Are there any liens, any outstanding mortgages?" "No," I replied. "Grandfather paid it off in 1992. The title is clear, it's just the property taxes which I pay." Vance was quiet for a long, agonizing moment. I watched his mind work, a high-speed processor analyzing data I couldn't comprehend. Slowly, a terrifying, razor-thin smile spread across his face. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled blood. "Mr. Hayes made a critical error," Vance murmured, tapping the demand letter. "He assumed you are broke, he assumed you are helpless. And most importantly, he and your siblings are so blinded by the prospect of a massive cash payout, they don't actually care who the money comes from." "I don't understand," I said, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. Vance pushed the Horizon contract toward me. "Look at the buyer, Horizon Development Group LLC. It's a faceless entity. Your brother and sister aren't selling to a person, they are selling to an LLC. They just want the $750,000. They want out. They want the cash. And they are demanding that all 3 of you sign the title over to a corporate buyer to avoid the partition." Vance leaned across the desk, his voice dropping an octave. "So let's give them exactly what they want. Let's give them a corporate buyer." I stared at him, the gears in my exhausted brain grinding to a halt. "I just told you I don't have the money." "You don't have the cash," Vance corrected. "But you have a flawless credit score, zero debt, and you are sitting on a third of a fully paid-off asset worth nearly $800,000. More importantly, if you own the whole thing, you would have an asset worth $800,000. He stood up and walked over to a whiteboard on the wall, grabbing a dry erase marker. "We are going to form a blind limited liability company," Vance stated, writing the letters LLC in bold black ink. "We will register it in Wyoming or Delaware. Both states have strict corporate anonymity laws. The public records will only show a registered agent, my firm. Your name will not appear anywhere on the state filings. To your brother, your sister, and their lazy lawyer, this LLC will look exactly like another massive, faceless corporate developer." "Okay," I breathed, my head spinning. "But how does the LLC pay them?" "Hard money," Vance said, drawing an arrow to the LLC. "It's a bridge loan, extremely high interest, short term, usually used by house flippers. I know a private commercial lender." Because the property is completely unencumbered by a mortgage, and because the loan-to-value ratio is incredibly safe for the lender, they will front the LLC the cash to buy the house. Once the LLC owns the property free and clear, you go to a traditional bank, take out a standard 30-year mortgage in your own name to pay off the hard money lender, and you keep the house. The room seemed to shrink. The magnitude of what he was proposing hit me like a physical weight. "You're saying I buy my own house," I whispered. "I buy their shares using the house itself as collateral and hide behind a fake company." "It's not fake, it's a perfectly legal corporate entity," Vance corrected sharply. "And yes, by demanding a forced sale to a third party, they have opened the door. We simply ensure the third party is you, but it requires absolute, flawless execution. If they catch wind that you are behind the LLC, they will back out of pure spite, and we are back to the partition lawsuit. You have to play the victim perfectly, you have to bleed." I looked at the whiteboard. I looked at the Horizon contract. I thought about Derek's cruel laugh. I thought about Sarah flicking cigarette ash on my grandmother's rug. I thought about the bulldozers tearing down the Fieldstone chimney. The fear evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, icy adrenaline. What do we do first? The next 9 days were a masterclass in psychological warfare and financial terror. First, I had to secure the capital. Vance connected me with his private lender, a terrifyingly blunt man who operated out of a nondescript office park. The terms of the hard money loan were brutal: 12% interest, 4 points up front. I had to liquidate my entire IRA, taking a massive tax penalty, and drain my life savings just to cover the closing costs, the origination fees, and Vance's exorbitant retainer. I was quite literally betting my life. If the deal fell through, if Derek and Sarah refused to sign, I wouldn't just lose the house. I would be entirely destitute, buried in high-interest debt with no retirement and no savings. I signed the loan documents with a hand that shook so violently the notary had to ask me to rewrite my signature. On Wednesday, the deadline Derek had given me, Vance executed the first phase of the trap. He formally rejected the Horizon Development Group contract. He sent a brief, aggressive letter to Marcus Hayes stating that his client, me, found the $750,000 offer insulting, and that we would rather take our chances in a partition lawsuit than give the property away to Horizon. Derek called me within 10 minutes of Hayes receiving the email. "Are you out of your fucking mind?" Derek screamed so loudly the phone speaker distorted. "You rejected the offer, you rejected the cash, I'm going to bury you. Hayes is filing the lawsuit tomorrow morning. You are dead, do you hear me? Dead." I held the phone away from my ears, staring out at the frozen lake. I forced my voice to tremble. I forced myself to hyperventilate slightly. "Derek, please," I whimpered, channeling every ounce of genuine terror I had felt over the past week into my performance. "The developer, they want to tear it down. I can't let them tear it down. Give me more time, please. I can find a buyer who will keep the house. Just give me a week." "You have until Friday," Derek spat venomously. "If we don't have a better offer by Friday at 5 p.m., the lawsuit is filed. Enjoy sleeping on the street, you pathetic loser." He hung up. I smiled in the empty kitchen. They were so predictable. They didn't want the lawsuit either. They wanted the path of least resistance to the cash. On Thursday, Vance filed the expedited paperwork with the state of Wyoming. Apex Horizon Holdings LLC was born. The registered agent was a shell company owned by Vance's law firm. The operating agreement, hidden behind layers of corporate privilege, listed me as the sole managing member and 100% equity owner. On Friday morning, Vance, acting exclusively in his capacity as the attorney representing Apex Horizon Holdings LLC, contacted Marcus Hayes. Vance pitched a masterpiece of corporate fiction. He claimed that Apex Horizon was a boutique, high-end conservation trust looking to acquire waterfront acreage for a private retreat. He claimed they had heard Horizon Development was circling the property and wanted to outbid them. Vance offered $780,000, all cash, 14-day closing. But Vance included two non-negotiable stipulations, deeply embedded in the legal jargon. Condition 1, the property must be delivered entirely vacant of all personal property, tenants, and prior owners at the exact hour of closing. Condition 2, this offer is strictly contingent upon the execution of a simultaneous joint transfer of title. All three named beneficiaries of the trust must sign the deed over to Apex Horizon Holdings, LLC concurrently. Failure of any single party to sign voids the transaction immediately. It was the exact same trap Derek had tried to set for me, just painted a different color. The bait was taken instantly. An extra $10,000 each for Derek and Sarah was enough to wipe Horizon Development completely from their memories. Now came the hardest part of the entire operation, the malicious compliance. Friday afternoon, my phone blew up. It was a group text from Sarah. Sarah, OMG, check your email. Hayes just forwarded us a new offer, 780K, from some trust fund company, Derek C. I told you holding out for a week might squeeze some more juice out of the market. $260K each, bro. Derek, don't screw this up. You wanted a buyer who wouldn't bulldoze it. Here they are. They want it for a retreat. Sign the intent to sell, or I swear to God, I filed the lawsuit on Monday. I waited an hour before responding. I had to make them believe I was agonizing over the decision. I had to make them believe I was breaking. I sat at my drafting table, the house freezing around me, and typed out my surrender. I talked to a lawyer today. He told me I can't fight the partition. I don't have the money to fight you in court. You win. If this new company promises not to tear down grandfather's house, I'll sign. Send me the paperwork. I'll start packing. The response was immediate and merciless. Derek. Smartest thing you've ever done. Don't worry, I'll make sure the new owners know you left the basement smelling like mold. Pack your shit quickly. Sarah, finally, honestly, I'm exhausted from dealing with your drama. Over the next 2 weeks, as the lawyers drafted the final purchase agreements and the hard money lender wired the funds into the escrow account, the gloating phase began. It was a psychological torture that tested every ounce of my self-control. Because they believed they had won, Derek and Sarah dropped all pretenses of civility. The mask was entirely off. They treated me with a level of cruelty that shocked even me, reveling in my impending homelessness. Sarah started sending me Zillow links. Hey, found a place in your budget, she would text, attaching a link to a dilapidated 400-square-foot studio apartment next to a highway overpass. It's a little small, but you don't have much stuff anyway, right? Lol. She posted constantly on social media, taking selfies in the mirror. Huge blessings coming my way, finally getting what I deserve. New car shopping this weekend. Blessed # real estate investor. Derek was worse. He showed up at the lake house unannounced on the final weekend before the closing. He didn't bring friends this time. He came alone, walking through the rooms like a conquering general surveying his plundered territory. I was in the kitchen, meticulously wrapping plates in newspaper and packing them into cardboard boxes. I had to maintain the illusion. I had packed half the house, stacking the boxes near the front door. Derek leaned against the doorframe, watching me tape a box shut. He took a sip from a bottle of my good bourbon. You know, I'm actually going to miss this place, he lied smoothly. Had some good parties here, but honestly, it's a dump. The new owners are probably going to gut it anyway. Who wants a giant stone fireplace? It's so dated. I kept my head down, biting the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. The contract said they wouldn't bulldoze it. Derek laughed. Bro, corporations lie. Once they own it, they can burn it to the ground for all I care. My check is going to clear regardless. Have you figured out where you're sleeping on Thursday? The contract says you have to be totally moved out by closing. I don't want you voiding the deal because your ugly flannel shirts are still in the closet. I have a friend with a couch, I muttered to the cardboard box. Tragic, Derek sneered. He walked over, clapping me hard on the shoulder, a physically aggressive gesture masked as brotherhood. Hey, look at the bright side. You've got 260 grand coming your way. Maybe you can finally invest in a crypto portfolio. I could manage it for you for a fee. Just leave, Derek, I said quietly. Sure thing, tenant, he mocked, turning toward the door. See you at the title company on Thursday. Don't be late. I've got a Porsche dealership waiting for me at 2:00 p.m. When the front door finally clicked shut behind him, I collapsed against the kitchen island, my whole body shaking with adrenaline and suppressed rage. I looked at the boxes stacked in the hallway. They were filled with junk. Old magazines, empty jars, scrap wood from the shed. My actual belongings, my clothes, my computer were safely locked in the attic. The trap was fully primed. The wire was pulled taut. On Wednesday night, the evening before the final closing, I sat alone in the dark living room. The power was still on barely, but I didn't turn on a single light. I sat by the cold fireplace, looking out at the black expanse of the lake. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, an automated email from Vance's office. Subject, escrow funded. Closing documents prepared for tomorrow at 10:00 a.m. The hard money loan had cleared. The trap was armed. $780,000 of high-interest, incredibly dangerous debt was sitting in an escrow account, waiting to be dispersed to the three of us. I stood up, I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a heavy canvas duffel bag. But I didn't put clothes in it. I opened the bag and carefully packed the heavy-duty commercial-grade deadbolts I had purchased with cash from a hardware store 3 towns over. I packed a reinforced steel strike plate. I packed my cordless drill, 2 spare batteries, and a set of titanium drill bits. Finally, I placed a stack of laminated, legally binding, no trespassing signs at the bottom of the bag. I zipped the duffel bag shut, the metallic rasp echoing in the silent house. Tomorrow, the old world would end. Tomorrow, I would either walk out of that title company as a homeless, bankrupt fool, or I would walk out as the sole king of Blackwood Lake. I set the alarm for 6 o'clock a.m., lay down on the couch, and for the first time in a month, I slept peacefully. The drive into the city on Thursday morning felt like a funeral procession. A heavy, suffocating gray overcast blanketed the sky, and an icy rain battered the windshield of my ancient Subaru. In the trunk, the canvas duffel bag containing the heavy-duty deadbolts, the drill, and the no trespassing signs slid slightly as I navigated the winding roads away from Blackwood Lake. Every mile I drove away from the house felt like a physical tearing of my own flesh. I was terrified. The plan Arthur Vance had orchestrated was legally airtight, but human beings are unpredictable and my siblings were vicious. If Derek caught even a whisper of suspicion, if he demanded to see the LLC's corporate structure before signing, the entire trap would instantly vaporize, and the partition lawsuit would obliterate my life. I parked in the underground garage of the towering steel and glass skyscraper that housed the title and escrow company. I sat in the driver's seat for a full 10 minutes, the engine off, staring at my hands gripping the steering wheel. They were shaking. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of cold garage air, and mentally locked my fear away in a dark box. For the next 2 hours, I had to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I had to be the utterly broken, defeated younger brother. I took the elevator up to the 30th floor. The lobby of Crestview Title and Escrow was a masterpiece of intimidating corporate wealth, polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray cityscape, and leather seating that cost more than my car. Derek and Sarah were already there. They were sitting in the center of the lobby, loud and impossible to ignore. Derek was wearing a tailored navy suit with no tie, looking like a Wall Street caricature, aggressively tapping on his phone. Sarah was draped in a trench coat that practically screamed designer labels, a massive pair of sunglasses pushed up into her hair. Marcus Hayes, their attorney, sat next to them, casually flipping through a legal pad. The moment the elevator doors dinged open and I stepped out, their heads snapped toward me. The predatory satisfaction in their eyes was blinding. I was wearing the exact same faded flannel shirt and scuffed work boots I had worn when the water heater flooded the basement. I deliberately slumped my shoulders, keeping my gaze fixed on the polished marble floor as I walked toward them. "Well, look who finally decided to join the real world," Derek announced, his voice booming across the quiet lobby, drawing the annoyed gaze of the receptionist. He stood up, towering over me, a cruel smirk plastered across his face. "Did you manage to fit your entire pathetic life into the back of your car, or are we going to have to hire a junk removal service for the rest?" "I packed what I needed," I mumbled, staring at his expensive leather shoes. "The rest is boxed up." Sarah let out a dramatic sigh, not even looking up from her phone. "Honestly, I can't believe it took this long to force you out. You've been dragging us down for years. Do you have any idea how stressful this has been for me? I had to postpone a trip to Chelum because you were being so stubborn." "Leave him alone, Sarah," Derek mocked, patting me hard on the shoulder. "He's having a tough day. He has to go find a real job now to pay for a tiny, miserable apartment. No more free rides on Granddad's dime." Marcus Hayes cleared his throat, snapping his briefcase shut. "If we are quite finished with the family pleasantries, the escrow officer is ready for us in conference room B. Let's get this finalized. My time is incredibly expensive." A polished, painfully cheerful escrow officer named Brenda ushered us into a massive glass-walled conference room. The mahogany table in the center was dominating, and at the far end sat a stack of legal documents nearly 3 inches thick. To the side, sitting quietly with his hands folded, was Arthur Vance. He was officially here as the attorney for Apex Horizon Holdings LLC, representing the buyer to ensure the transaction went smoothly. Derek paused for a fraction of a second when he saw Vance. "Who is this guy?" "Arthur Vance," Vance said smoothly, not offering to shake hands. "Counsel for Apex Horizon. I'm here to ensure the deed transfer is executed perfectly and to release the funds once all signatures are verified." "Right, the corporate suit," Derek chuckled, taking a seat at the head of the table like a CEO presiding over a board meeting. "Well, tell your bosses they're getting a great piece of dirt. Just make sure the check clears. The funds are currently resting securely in the escrow account, Mr. Blackwood," Brenda, the escrow officer, chirped, completely oblivious to the venom in the room. $780,000. Once all parties have signed the transfer of deed and the closing documents, I will immediately authorize the wire transfers directly into your respective bank accounts. Now who wants to sign first? Derek practically snatched the expensive black pen from the table, handed over. For the next 45 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the scratching of the pen on paper, the rustle of pages, and the infuriating, rhythmic tapping of Sarah's perfectly manicured nails on the mahogany. The tension in my chest was so tight it was physically painful. I felt like a bomb technician defusing a nuclear warhead, knowing that a single wrong word would trigger annihilation. Brenda slid the documents to Sarah. She signed them with a flourish, barely reading a single line. She was already mentally spending the money. Finally, the massive stack of paper was pushed across the table to me. This was it, the absolute point of no return. The paper facing me was the grant deed. It was the legal mechanism that stripped my name from the title of my grandfather's house, handing it entirely over to Apex Horizon Holdings LLC. Come on, let's go, Derek snapped, leaning across the table, his patience evaporating. Don't start crying now, you lost, sign the damn paper. Is it really over? I asked, my voice cracking perfectly. I looked at Marcus Hayes. There's no way to reverse this once I sign. Hayes smiled, a cold, patronizing expression. Once the ink is dry, the title is irrevocably transferred to the LLC. You have zero legal rights to the property, the land, or anything on it. Your tenancy is immediately terminated. Sign. I took a slow, shuddering breath. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. I looked at Derek. His eyes were wide, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. I looked at Sarah. She was already opening her banking app on her phone. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. I flipped the page. I signed again. I initialed the margins. I signed the disclosures. I signed the final release of claims. I systematically dismantled my own legal ownership of the property stroke by stroke until the massive stack was complete. I pushed the papers back to Brenda. Excellent, Brenda smiled, gathering the documents into a neat pile. She began aggressively stamping them with her notary seal. Thump, 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 the sound was deafening. Everything appears to be in order. The signatures match the trust documents. I am now executing the deed transfer. She turned to her laptop, typing rapidly. We sat in agonizing silence for 2 minutes. All right, Brenda announced brightly. The deed is officially recorded with the county. Title has successfully transferred to Apex Horizon Holdings LLC. I am now releasing the escrow funds, $260,000 to Derek Blackwood, $260,000 to Sarah Blackwood, and $260,000 to, she paused, looking at my wiring instructions. To my attorney's trust account, I interrupted quietly. Yes, of course, Brenda nodded, hitting the final keystroke. The wires have been sent. They should reflect in your accounts momentarily. Sarah let out a high-pitched, genuine squeal of delight. It's there, oh my God, it's pending. I'm rich. Derek let out a massive, booming laugh, slamming his hands down on the table. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Unbelievable, finally it's done. God, what a nightmare that was. Marcus, you're a genius. Your bonus is in the mail. Hayes smirked, packing his briefcase. A pleasure doing business with you, Derek. Derek turned to me. The mask of business was gone. Only the pure, unadulterated bully remained. He walked around the table until he was standing directly over me. Listen to me, you pathetic little leech, Derek sneered, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. You have exactly 2 hours to get whatever garbage you have left out of that house. If I drive by there this afternoon and see your piece of shit car in the driveway, I will personally call the police and have you arrested for trespassing on corporate property. You are nothing, you have nothing, never contact me or Sarah again. Sarah stood up, slinging her designer bag over her shoulder. Yeah, honestly, lose our numbers, you are completely exhausting. Bye. They turned to walk toward the glass doors of the conference room, leaving me sitting in the chair. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had taken my grandfather's legacy, ripped it apart, and sold the pieces to line their own pockets. I took a deep breath, the panic, the terror, the weakness, it all evaporated, my spine straightened. The cold, ironclad reality of what had just happened settled into my veins. Wait, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was completely different. The tremor was gone. The defeat was gone. It cut through the air of the conference room like a gunshot. Derek stopped with his hand on the glass door handle. He turned around, an irritated scowl on his face. What do you want now? The deal is done. You have no power here. You're right, I said calmly, slowly standing up from my chair. The deal is done. The title is irrevocably transferred. The ink is dry. You said so yourself, Marcus. Hayes stopped packing his briefcase, his brow furrowing slightly. Yes, that is what I said. What is your point? I reached into the inner pocket of my worn flannel jacket. I pulled out a single, neatly folded document. It was printed on thick, heavy stock paper. I unfolded it and laid it flat on the mahogany table. My point, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls, is that you were absolutely right about one thing, Derek. The property now legally belongs to a faceless corporate entity. And as of 3 minutes ago, you and Sarah have entirely signed away your generational rights to Blackwood Lake forever. Derek rolled his eyes. We know that idiot. We got the cash. We won. What is this? He gestured dismissively at the paper on the table. This, I replied, staring directly into my brother's eyes, is the legally binding operating agreement for Apex Horizon Holdings LLC, registered in the state of Wyoming. The room went entirely still. The ambient noise of the city outside seemed to mute itself. Derek's eyes slowly dropped to the paper on the table. Mr. Vance, I said, not breaking eye contact with Derek. As the registered agent for the LLC, could you please read the ownership structure aloud for my former co-owners? Arthur Vance stood up slowly. A terrifying, predatory smile finally broke across his weathered face. He picked up the document, adjusted his glasses, and read in a clear, booming voice. Pursuant to the laws of the state of Wyoming, Apex Horizon Holdings LLC is a single-member limited liability company. The sole managing member, holding 100% of the equity, voting rights, and total legal ownership of the entity and all its acquired assets, including the property located at Blackwood Lake. Vance paused for dramatic effect, savoring the kill. "And is your brother?" The silence that followed was absolute. It was a physical vacuum. I watched the exact moment Derek's brain processed the information. The smug, arrogant smirk melted off his face, replaced by a sickening, pale horror. His jaw went slack, the blood drained completely from his cheeks. Sarah let out a confused, nervous giggle. "Wait, what does that mean, Derek? What is he talking about?" "It means," I said, stepping away from the table and walking toward them, "that there is no mysterious corporate developer. There is no luxury megamansion compound. There is no bulldozer. You didn't force a sale to a third party. You sold your two-thirds of the house directly to me." "No," Derek whispered, his eyes wide, stepping backward away from the door. "No, that's impossible. You don't have the money. You're broke. The escrow was funded. Where did the money come from?" "Hard money bridge loan," Vance supplied helpfully from the table. "Secured against the total unencumbered equity of the property itself. A very aggressive play, but flawlessly executed. By demanding a forced sale to avoid partition, you practically handed him the keys. The LLC bought the property using the property's own value. He will refinance into a standard 30-year mortgage next week." You tricked us," Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her designer sunglasses tumbling off her head and clattering onto the floor. "You stole our house." "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I paid you exactly what you demanded, $780,000 above market value. You got your cash. You got exactly what you wanted. But you no longer own the property. I am the 100% sole, legal owner of Blackwood Lake." Derek exploded, his face turned a violent, mottled purple. He lunged forward, roaring like a wounded animal, his hands reaching for my throat. "I will kill you. I will tear that contract apart. Marcus, fix this, Sue Him. He committed fraud." Before Derek could reach me, Arthur Vance slammed his fist onto the mahogany table with the force of a thunderclap. "Take one more step toward my client, Mr. Blackwood, and I will have you arrested for felony assault," Vance roared, his voice terrifyingly authoritative. "There was no fraud. We operated entirely within the legal parameters you and your incompetent counsel demanded. You signed a blind corporate sale agreement to avoid a partition lawsuit. You legally liquidated your assets." Derek stopped, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He whipped his head around to glare at Marcus Hayes. Hayes was staring at the operating agreement on the table, his face completely ashen. The realization that he had been entirely outmaneuvered by a superior attorney and his own laziness had just hit him. "Marcus," Derek screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Tell me this isn't real. Tell me we can reverse this." Hayes slowly shook his head, refusing to meet Derek's eyes. The title has already been recorded. The funds have been dispersed. The transaction is fully consummated. There are no contingencies. There is no legal mechanism to reverse a completed real estate transaction based on seller's remorse regarding the buyer's identity. "Seller's remorse," Sarah shrieked, collapsing into one of the expensive leather chairs, bursting into hysterical, dramatic tears. "He played us, he gets the house and we get kicked out. Derek, do something." But Derek had nothing left. His power, his leverage, his entire identity as the domineering older brother had been legally, surgically amputated. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a helpless, burning hatred. "You're a dead man," Derek hissed. "You think you can keep that house? I know where you live. I will make sure you never sleep a single night in peace." I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I stepped squarely into his personal space, forcing him to look down at me. "No, Derek, you don't know where I live," I said softly, the absolute certainty of my victory ringing in every word. "Because if you ever step foot on my property again, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing. If you ever contact me again, I will file a restraining order. You wanted a business transaction, you got it. We have no further business. And we are no longer family." I turned my back on them. I picked up my jacket, nodded gratefully to Arthur Vance, and walked out of the glass conference room. Behind me, the muffled sounds of Derek screaming at his lawyer and Sarah sobbing hysterically echoed through the sterile corporate lobby. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The drive back to Blackwood Lake was a blur of pure, intoxicating adrenaline. The heavy gray clouds had broken, and pale winter sunlight was streaming through the trees as I tore down the highway. I didn't have much time. I knew Derek's rage. The moment the shock wore off, he would realize his keys still worked. He would drive up to the house to vandalize it, to smash the windows, to destroy the interior out of pure childish spite. I arrived at the house by 1 p.m. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, the sound no longer a warning of invasion but a welcome home. I didn't waste a single second. I grabbed the heavy canvas duffel bag from the trunk and ran to the front door. I pulled out the cordless drill and went to work. I stripped out the old brass deadbolt my grandfather had installed decades ago. It hurt to remove it, but it was necessary. I installed the commercial-grade steel deadbolt, driving 3-inch steel screws directly into the framing studs. I reinforced the strike plate. I tested the lock. It clicked into place with a heavy, satisfying thunk. I moved to the back door off the deck. I changed that lock. I went to the sliding glass door in the basement and jammed a solid steel bar into the track. I walked out to the head of the long dirt driveway and used a heavy-duty staple gun to affix the laminated "No Trespassing VIOLATORS will be PROSSUTD by police" signs to the massive pine trees flanking the entrance. I had already scheduled a contractor to install a heavy steel gate with a keypad, but for today, the signs and the new locks would have to be enough. By 4 p.m., the house was an impenetrable fortress. I stood in the center of the living room. The silence was absolute. There was no thumping bass. There were no drunken shouts. There was only the gentle sound of the wind moving through the evergreens and the distant lapping of the freezing lake against the shoreline. I walked over to the massive fieldstone fireplace. I ran my hand over the rough mortar. "It's mine," I thought. The reality washed over me, a wave of profound, exhausted relief. It's finally safe. That night, Derek did show up. Around 9 p.m., headlights slashed through the trees and his heavy truck roared down the driveway. I watched from the darkened window of the attic bedroom. He stormed up onto the front porch, enraged and likely drunk. I heard the frantic jingling of his keys. I heard him jam his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He jiggled it violently. He pounded his fists against the heavy oak door. "Open this door," he screamed into the night. "You can't do this to me. I own this place. I'll burn it down." I didn't say a word. I simply picked up my phone, dialed the local sheriff's department, and reported an aggressive trespasser attempting to break into my property. 20 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of 2 squad cars illuminated the forest. I watched as the deputies approached Derek on the porch. I watched him scream at them, pointing at the house. I watched the deputies calmly ask him for proof of ownership. When Derek couldn't produce it, and when the deputies verified the new deed registration I had emailed them earlier that afternoon, they gave him a choice. Leave immediately in handcuffs or leave in his truck. Derek got back into his truck, slammed the door, and spun his tires furiously in the gravel as he drove away, escorted by the police. That was the last time I ever saw my brother. 6 months later, the spring thaw had finally broken the ice on Blackwood Lake. The water was a brilliant, sparkling sapphire, and the pine trees were bursting with bright green new growth. I was sitting on the dock, the warm sun beating down on my shoulders, a mug of fresh coffee in my hand. The transition hadn't been easy, but it had been victorious. The hard money loan was brutal for the first month, but Vance had arranged for a rapid appraisal. Because the property was worth nearly $800,000, the bank easily approved me for a standard 30-year mortgage to pay off the private lender. My monthly payments were high, but I picked up extra freelance drafting contracts, and for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't bleeding money to subsidize my siblings' parasitic lifestyles. The financial weight was heavy, but the psychological freedom was absolute. Karma, as it turned out, was a swift and merciless auditor. I heard the news through a distant cousin who still kept tabs on the family gossip. Derek and Sarah had received exactly what they demanded, $260,000 each in cold, hard cash. And true to their natures, they had squandered it with terrifying speed. Derek, convinced of his own infallible financial genius, had taken his entire $250,000 payout and dumped it into a highly leveraged speculative cryptocurrency venture that a buddy had pitched him. 3 months later, the platform collapsed in a massive fraud scandal. Derek lost every single penny. He was currently facing eviction from his luxury apartment and was attempting to sue Marcus Hayes for malpractice, a lawsuit that was instantly thrown out of court. Sarah's downfall was less spectacular but equally pathetic. She had immediately paid off her massive credit card debt, only to immediately max the cards out again buying a brand new Range Rover she couldn't afford to insure, a closet full of designer clothes, and a month-long influencer retreat in Bali. By the time she returned, she had blown through the remaining cash and was right back where she started, drowning in debt, posting tearful videos online about how the universe was treating her unfairly. They had sacrificed our grandfather's legacy for a fleeting moment of hollow wealth, and the universe had stripped it from them. I took a sip of my coffee and looked back at the house. The cedar siding looked beautiful in the morning light. The fieldstone chimney stood tall and proud against the blue sky. There were no empty beer cans in the fire pit. There were no strange cars in the driveway. The heavy steel security gate at the road remained firmly locked. My grandfather had built this sanctuary with his own hands, hoping it would keep the family together. He had been wrong about the family. The rot was too deep. But as I sat there in the absolute, uninterrupted silence, listening to the call of a loon across the water, I realized I had fulfilled his ultimate wish. I had kept the fires burning, and I was never, ever letting them go out.